A few, a few. Let's get into it. A few good movies. A few, a good, a few, good, a few. Let's get into it. A few good movies.
Hey everybody, welcome to this episode of A Few Good Movies. We are in the middle of the Halloween season and we're keeping the Halloween vibes alive. More horror-themed stuff. Happy to be here. With me is Sam Resmel.
Hey, what's up, guys?
And not with us, you may notice,
mysteriously,
is Chris Porto. Yes, mysteriously he is not here. Maybe we'll figure out where he is later.
We have
on a different episode.
You'll find out soon enough where he went.
Yes, we're very lucky today to have a guest host with us.
Yeah,
his name is Justin Krohn. He is a very accomplished editor. He has worked on such content as American Horror Story, Mr.Robot, Homecoming, Twin Peaks: The Return. And we're really happy to have him here. Welcome, Justin.
Hey.
Thank you. Great to be here, guys.
Hey, so we're going to talk about some horror today. And one thing that I actually wanted to bring up from our last episode on cosmic horror is that we brought up Twin Peaks.
We did. Twin Peaks.
We thought that possibly, given our definition of cosmic horror, that it might fall into the cosmic horror genre. What do you think about that? Where is your stance on where that might fit in terms of genre? I know it's really hard to define that one.
Yeah, because you would text me about this, and I was thinking about it. I mean, I have a hard time. David's stuff to me so often defies everything else that's out there. So that's why I never thought about it as horror stuff, even though there are elements of that. And yet, the more I thought about it once you said the question, because my immediate response was no, I think, if you want it to be, it could. It definitely has elements of that. I always just thought, even more so than a lot of like the cosmic horror stuff, David is dealing with a very kind of specific world of the subconscious and kind of, to me, dream logic. That's how I interpret it. I don't want to, obviously I can't speak for him. Yeah. And it specifically, a lot of that stuff is to him, and it's a very specific world that I don't think has much crossover or, anything with any other filmmakers out there. I think that's what makes his stuff so special. It certainly made it working on it very special. I mean, I was a big fan before I worked on Twin Peaks. So, and I love the original series as well as all his movies. And then there's certain things in like the original Twin Peaks that are just horrifying and very scary. Obviously,
Bob
like
is terrifying.
And that whole and what what the Red Room is like. I just remember watching when I had seen that when it had first come out, or when I become aware of it. Because my older brother would watch it when it came out, and I didn't know about it, and I was aware of it and didn't really watch it until I got into college. And even then, I found it those elements of it scary, even though that the series touches on so many different elements of like types of filmmaking and types of storytelling. The parts that are truly terrifying, that have like kind of that more scary element are very scary and very scary to relation to a lot of stuff. And I find it really more terrifying than most actual horror films, but I think he's touching on things that, like, to me, I love horror films, but to me they're very much like a roller coaster ride.
Yeah.
It's very fun to get on the ride and go off. And David's stuff to me has always stuck with me.
Yeah.
And it's stuff I think about constantly, well past after watching it.
It's more cerebral than most horror movies can be.
For sure. And the whole fear of the unknown thing that we talk so much about with Cosmic, that's the part that, because there's so much about it that is, it gives you that sense of just like, wow, I can't comprehend like what the Red Room means, like what it all means, what Bob means. That like, I mean, is what makes it so eerie and terrifying of an experience. Yeah. It's very experiential, very in your head.
Yeah, and a lot of things are kind of left unexplained, or at least not explained to a point where you're like, oh, that's exactly what it is.
Oh yeah,
and that keeps the creepiness.
You would never get that.
Yeah, you won't get that from. You won't even get that from David Lynch in interviews and stuff that I've seen.
I mean, that's kind of by purpose, and I think that's one of the great things about David is, I think, especially in a world where things are very over-explained nowadays, and there's so many sites devoted to telling you exactly what to think, he doesn't want to do that. Even for me working on it, I mean, I never really asked about stuff, and he doesn't want to talk about it. And it actually, as a viewer of the original show, and even having worked on it, it's something that stayed in my imagination and thinking about more so than anything else I've done. And that's a gift, because you don't really get that in many things. Many things, it's like they want to explain it to death,
Right.
and things have to be mapped out, and I think fans, I think there's kind of a danger in that fans want that really badly now, and people want to know, what did this mean exactly? And I need to know, and I think it's just part of the age we live in, but I think the mystery and the unknowable is kind of what David's going for. And I'm sure he knows some of the stuff, or maybe he doesn't, because I said I do think a lot of it has to do with subconscious and dream logic.
Right.
But I think a filmmaker who's willing to say, I'm willing to not explain it and to let you wonder and let it sit in your head, that's pretty amazing, because most films you see now and you forget a day or two later, you know?
Right.
And I don't think you ever feel it about David's stuff. Love it, hate it, it sits with you for a long time.
Sure. I'm thinking too of Get Out and Us. Jordan Peele stuff also kind of sits with you for a long time as well. I remember when we all went to go see Us, not being fully convinced about it when I first left the theater, but the more days that passed, the more that it stuck with me and the more that I actually appreciated it.
Yeah, that one was that one wasn't that scary, but it was a roller coaster ride. And I remember thinking, what was the point of this movie? And trying to wrestle that in my head was the fun part of the movie.
Yeah. Well, speaking of truly terrifying, as we mentioned earlier, I just real quick, I think that as we talk about horror films, to talk about what is it about horror films for each of us personally really scares us. What's the thing that gets to us? What element makes us, actually scared? Does anybody?
Yeah, I mean,
know?
I'll answer this real quickly, because I know exactly.
Yeah.
At least in movies, I know sounds and stuff freak me out. In one of the movies we talk about, Audition, there's a Japanese woman torturing a man, and she's speaking Japanese, but it's ki ki ki, and she's shoving these these nails into him, and she's just saying like harder or something. I can't remember what the translation is.
Deeper. I'm pretty sure.
And it's just, but that noise, just the way she's saying it is so freaky to me that's the shit that scares me. And then in Body Snatchers, another movie that we're doing, there's the
way to just reveal everything, bro.
Well, yeah.
Nobody listen to this part. Wait for later.
Yeah, well, we won't reveal Chris's pick yet. There's a lot of sound design with the spores and the hatching of the pod people, pod bastards, that really, really freak me out.
So it's that visceral feeling that you get from a sound or an image.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Justin, what do you think for you?
I mean, it's weird because I don't know that I ever get scared from horror movies at all anymore. I really don't. I have a hard time, and it's because maybe I worked on a number of horror-esque things, but also I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I mean, I find the real world fucking terrifying as fuck right now, especially now.
Right now,
what could be
and so to me, it's I've been watching a ton of horror movies lately, almost as an escape to be I'm going to go watch the thrill ride and get away from it. I mean, it's the thing I really love about horror movies, and because I do love watching them. I love watching with an audience or with somebody I know who hasn't seen them, which I'm kind of really missing during this time, because I like to see people react. It really excites me to see people freak out. I mean, I remember when I went to go see Don't Breathe, when that came out, I saw it at the Vista in Los Feliz, and there's a number of really freaky things of people getting scared, and you saw it in the audience, and it was just this great thing. And I just remember my girlfriend at the time was sitting by me, and she was terrified, and I was laughing through a lot of it, not because I thought it was funny, but because I just enjoyed the reactions of people. It was just so kind of fun to see people get freaked out, Totally. I remember us showing another ex, Halloween, which she had never seen, the original one. And I remember she freaked out. Like, she was like, what's happening? What's happening? And was scared shitless. And it was like such a fun experience.
Yeah,
you know, I mean, I
it's
think
like going to Universal or one of those haunted houses. You know, they don't necessarily scare me.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen so many of them, but it's just fun to see other people.
I mean, I'll still jump at a good jump scare. I remember I'm sure I've seen it before, but I remember the biggest one I've seen in recent years was the Jason Bateman film, The Gift. I went and saw that.
Oh, yeah.
And there's like a thing with like the dog, where the dog kind of like, you think the dog's like been kidnapped or disappeared, and it jumps out. And I remember jumping out of my seat. It was just a great jump scare. Now it's not, that's just more in a moment of like
you can't even prevent it.
Yeah.
And like, if it's a good jump scare, it's going to get you whether you're scared of it or not.
Yeah.
That's just, but yeah, I agree with you, man. It's like once you work on horror films a little bit, you kind of see behind the curtain.
Yeah.
And they become a little less scary because you know the tricks they're pulling.
Yeah.
But
I will say,
I find it fun to see them because you know the tricks.
Yeah, I mean, I will say the one things I've never found scary is I'm not huge on demonic possession or overly supernatural stuff. Like, I never found The Exorcist scary. I remember seeing it as a kid when I still found things scary. And I was like, what's the point?
I find that so scary.
Like, I just don't. I mean, I think the filmmaking is great. And like it's a very, very audacious movie. But the basic premise, I think in a way you have to believe about God or like the afterlife.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's not supernatural to some people.
Yeah, and the truth is, I don't believe in. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God, so it's hard for me to buy into it. It's like,
I still feel like I don't like messing with it. Like, I don't want to like play with the Ouija board either. Like, I grew up Catholic, and maybe some of that's just stuck with me. That like anything that deals with religion, it freaks me out. Like those movies do actually.
Yeah.
I get uncomfortable by them.
Yeah.
Just because the thought of it is because they're such old concepts.
Yeah.
It's like you're messing with very old things.
Yeah. But, I do enjoy watching those movies though, and I actually do, even though I don't believe in it. I always find the Catholic belief for like that belief system it's such a fascinating storytelling thing. You know, whether it be in horror movies or if you just look in like the work of Scorsese, you know, like I really do kind of respect people who truly believe in this stuff because it's so ingrained in the culture that it's ingrained in a lot of storytelling that they're always interesting stories to watch. I mean, there's a lot of movies I like that not even as horror movies that where you have figures who are deeply religious, believe in it, that I really enjoy, I really love or really enjoy watching, but I don't need to believe that to do it. I just find in horror movies that I just can't get behind, like I'm just like, oh, well, no one's going to get possessed. I think we're good, you know? Whereas like Halloween, it's like, I can believe there could be a crazy person out there haunting me. Even zombie movies, it's like, true. I kind of get like, oh yeah, that could happen. I mean,
although to your point earlier, I was going to say that one of the scariest things I've seen this season is The Social Dilemma, which is a documentary about social media.
That is crazy.
So reality is super scary, but I was thinking a lot about, go ahead, Sam.
Mike Myers, like in the newest Halloween, don't they allude to him being like from hell? Like he is demonic and he's just pure evil in a way.
I don't think it's in the new one because I think they're kind of trying to do a continuation of like I thought the whole new one was like it was a reboot but kind of a sequel to the very first one.
Right. In the first one, he's just like a crazy guy and you know.
Well, he's like
in the new one. I thought they allude like there's like a priest at the prison or whatever.
I don't remember that. I do know that comes up in the other sequels.
They did,
and and so I think that was a thing. Yeah, and even like Friday the 13th kind of has that same thing with like Jason. You know, so it's kind
That's
of
the
like
problem with those. There's so many sequels that eventually, even if at first it's not the case, that like the backstory keeps kind of shifting and like moving around, and eventually at some point there'll be a movie where he's demonic or whatever.
Where he's in space.
It's really hard to keep track of who's in space.
I mean, Jason Space is a horrible movie, but God, it's so fun.
What's the one where is it Jason in New York or is it
Jason Takes
Michael
Manhattan?
Myers? Yeah. Oh my God. Just really quick, I was thinking in terms of what I find scary in horror, and I really nailed it down to a couple of things for me personally. Movies in which you can't trust anybody around you, which is, I picked spoiler, I picked Body Snatchers, but the idea that you can't trust anybody, there's nowhere you can turn, freaks me out. And two, movies in which there's no way out of the situation, like there's really no good solution to get out of it.
Yeah.
Like a zombie movie, tends to freak me out because I always try to reason out in my head, well, I would never go to the into that basement or into this haunted house, or I would never go into space or whatever the case may be. But for example, a movie that everything just happens in a normal environment that anyone can find themselves in.
Yeah.
Like Paranormal Activity, for it being, people don't think it's a great movie, but like that scenario is terrifying because it could happen to anyone regardless of the choices that you make prior to it. So, for me, the ones that are scary are those are the.
Now that you say that, the one thing I think I'm remembering that I'd seen in recent years, and God, maybe it's come out over 10 years ago, was when I went and saw the first Descent in the theater. Just because I do like just not even got to like the monsters in the movie appear. It's the being in the claustrophobia of it. And I think that movie uses like the confined and like darkness of being in like a tunnel. And if you've ever done that, which I've done a little bit and been, it's like, it's really like when you can't move and you can't like, it's hard to get out of things.
Yeah.
Like, not like that.
Yeah. It's like, it is very freaky because it's a very like,
yeah.
You have to calm yourself down, but it can like, you can really lose control. And so I thought that movie was great even before I got to the monsters. And then it upped it. So like as a movie going experience, I was like, oh, that may have been the last thing I truly is like, I left and I was like, that was like freaky just because like I have my own claustrophobia. So,
right. Or something like, I just remember now, like, wasn't it Open Water? The one where the divers are just stuck in the water. The whole movie is just them like lost at sea. It's terrifying. That's a terrifying notion.
I was just like, I was just thinking about a movie we disagreed on, Justin, The Quiet Place. And I don't think it's a good movie, but I do think it puts you in a place where you're freaking out because you can't hear what's coming and it's very quiet, and it is that's the thing that got me with it. And to your point, you were saying seeing it in a theater, even though people weren't like screaming or being afraid, the idea of like there's something about to jump out and all I can hear are like people eating popcorn or drinking soda, like that kind of freaks me out a bit because it's like this is so quiet. I can hear people just like maneuvering in their seats.
I mean, I remember when I saw the theater, I do remember a lot of people jumping because the movie has a lot of really good jump scares.
Yeah, it does.
Mm-hmm.
I think that movie does something great too, in that I think in the best horror movies, it anchors you with a very, with a family that you care about. I mean, I don't think every great horror movie is centered around a family, but every great horror movie to me centers around really strong characters who have their own dynamic going on, and I think that film does it absolutely wonderfully.
Yeah.
And I think I've been watching a ton of bad horror movies, so it's like you can usually tell, I've been watching a ton of stuff on Shudder just to pass the time, and there are things you're like, this isn't going to be very good because there's just no character development at all. I mean, and sometimes those can be their own fun if it's just a straight slasher film, but usually they're not because there's no investment in the story. I mean, I remember even a movie like Hostel, which I have a ton of respect for. That first one is like the first 45 minutes of that movie, you don't even nothing happens really except hanging out with these college kids, which I thought was amazing. It's like Roth really makes you invest in the characters so that when shit starts to get crazy, you actually give a fuck what happens to them, and it does make what happened more kind of a gut punch because you actually want to know what happens to these characters.
That actually reminds me of a movie you suggested to me, Climax. The first, I want to say 15, 20 minutes are literally these audition tapes of dancers in this dance troupe. And you're like, what this is not scary. This isn't even that interesting. They're all kind of scummy douchebags. Until an hour in, and some really crazy shit just happens. And it's a roller coaster ride from there.
I mean, I just think that's one of the best movies of last year.
Yeah.
And I saw it at the ArcLight, and to me it was just it's a great just cinematic experience. Number one, one of the best like dance sequences, music. I would couldn't call it a musical sequence. It's one take that opens the movie. It's just amazing, just great filmmaking. And then it just starts to get crazier and crazier as the movie goes on. In some ways, it's kind of like a movie like Possession. If you guys have seen that, just in the craziness that it gets to.
Wait, is the new one?
No, it's with.
Oh, that's Possessor, right? With
this is like a Polish film.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, and it's really, really great. And a Polish filmmaker. And it's just sort of, but I just like the craziness of like climax as it goes on and it gets crazier and crazier.
That was going to be my pick until I saw Audition.
Yeah.
It is a crazy, scary movie.
And I love just like seeing it too, because like the audience reaction when I saw it was so divided. You could hear it like when we were like watching it. I went and saw it with 3 friends, 2 of them also filmmakers, one a distributor. And like there were people behind us who like hated it. I was loving it, like I just thought it was great. Yeah. And we walked out and talked about it afterwards. And me and a friend of mine the one I know the longest of the group, just loved it. And the other 2 hated it. And we had like a long discussion about what we loved and what we hated. And my one friend was
question.
Yeah.
I have in general, do you think divisiveness is a good sort of attribute for a horror film or almost any film really? Is that a good thing?
I think it can be. Yeah. I think it all depends, but I do think I think Climax isn't a movie that's going to get a huge audience. So a film like that, I think Gaspar Noé kind of shoots for being kind of a more on the fringe filmmaker. So that's not surprising on that.
I think if it's divisive for certain reason, like if it's divisive because it's not that scary or it's, asking a question that no one cares about, then that might be a problem. But if it's divisive because the characters are interesting, but they're assholes, because there's a lot of movies and TV shows where people just hate the characters so much that they don't watch, even though that's the reason to watch it, because they are interesting characters, even though they're not great.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think I don't think divisiveness is bad. I also think like things can be very subjective sometimes. I do think the fun thing about a horror movie, especially when you can go see it in an audience, is if a movie is generally scary, even if you aren't necessarily the most scared by it, there's this group kind of thing that takes over that you kind of get scared with it, which is the great thing about a horror movie. I don't think there are a lot of things, like I don't think you get that in most other types of movies. Like you can go see a drama movie and the response can be all over the place and you won't have necessarily the visceral response that you get out of a horror movie. I really think horror and comedy are the 2 things that are just benefit so much from the group experience, because you can't control sometimes what you get scared by. And I think you can't, and that can be contagious. And laughter is very contagious,
Sure. That's why test screenings are so important for those genres, especially.
Yeah.
I remember being on a comedy years ago, and they did so many test screenings because it was the only way to tell if jokes were landing. And one of the best experiences I've ever had, anything that I've worked on, was sitting in the back of a theater and watching an audience react to certain jokes in the movie and nearly like tearing the place down. I thought it was so funny.
Yeah.
And like you would have never known that was what was going to happen unless you were there. So
there's a real subjectiveness.
Test audiences. You got to have them.
To it all. I mean, that's the fun thing when you're cutting horror stuff, because and I've cut comedy stuff too, is it get very cerebral because you've seen it so many times and you're working on it. You think, oh yeah, this is funny, or yeah, I think this is scary. But then the funnest thing, especially for horror stuff, is when you bring it in and like show like a group of people, or like even just it's just your whatever, and you see people start to get uneasy or freak out. Like, and I've had this, and I was listening to Horror Story, like would do it with sequences that I was working on, like, is this scary? Is this scary?
Oh yeah.
And you get people to come in and they just freak out, over stuff, and that's like, it's such a great like feeling because you're like, I did something right here.
So that's actually interesting with Horror Story. I mean, I've seen some seasons and not some others, but do you cut that? Because it's always more than just a horror thing. There's also just drama in it. It's also real life drama. Do you go into it with the mentality of cutting for horror, or do you go into it with the mentality of cutting just a serialized drama?
Well, I think everything you're kind of trying to anchor the characters, and I kind of try to do projects that I'm grab to the overall story, not just the kind of set of circumstances, because I think things fall apart if you don't. but when you're actually cutting it, the sequences or scenes that are going to like, I mean, the sequences that you're building that are going to be the more scary scenes, I mean, they're pretty obvious and they're kind of more the set pieces. And so there are ways you build those you wouldn't normally build, like, your typical like dramatic scenes within the show. But I mean, and I like to do a lot of sound design. There's a lot of music. Obviously on that show, we did a ton of it. So, but that's the fun stuff about doing it, is like just adding all those layers, I mean, it's so kind of like, I think that's the really fun thing, is like when you start doing it, especially in the horror kind of thing, is like those layers are the fun thing, because you can cut it. And if you had no sound to it, you're like, okay, this isn't going to, someone walking down a hall isn't going to be scary. But you start throwing in like creaks or footsteps or just kind of these kind of atmospheric things that really add like that layer to it. You start to be like, okay, cool. I kind of, we're getting somewhere here, and you're building the tension and like, that's super fun, and so it's the doing of that is very satisfying, and it's a very fun process.
Absolutely. Yeah. I had assistant edited for some indie horrors back in the day, and it really taught me that like how important the sound design is to any horror thing. Like I would be working by myself in this basement office and a scene wouldn't be scary, and then by the time I finished sound designing it, I was freaking myself out.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, that is like night and day, the difference that sound design can really add to a scene.
Yeah.
But so just in general, before we get on to the next topic, which is our picks for next episode, Justin, what are some of your favorite horror films, and what have you been watching this October?
Yeah, I mean, I know I had sent like kind of a long list when you guys had sent it, so I'll kind of distill down to a few things. I mean,
sure.
For me, like every October, I try to watch like a couple horror movies a day. It depends how busy I am. Right now, I'm able to watch a lot because I'm not working. But there's some mainstays, and I'll kind of mention those. And a lot of them go back to like, because horror movies are the first thing I really binged like as a kid. Like I would go home and like watch things, and I remember in grade school, and I had friends, and we would watch stuff together. And I think we kind of went through kind of everything. I mean, we did the Nightmare on Elm Streets and like, The Shining and other. I remember watching a lot of those type of films, like as like sleepovers and stuff. But then the things that have stayed with me are kind of things that I remember seeing when I was younger, and I kind of go back to. I mean, the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a really big, important film for me. I mean, I think I know you're going to talk about the newer, the 78 version, which I think is also just an amazing film. But the first one, there's some datedness to it, but it's kind of amazing. And especially when you start reading the history of it, and just, that it, in some ways, even though it's disputed where they really meant to be a political allegory at the time, you watch it and you could think it's on either side of the Red Scare, depending on what you think. But it's a very audacious movie, especially the way it ends, which is him running in traffic, like, you're next, even though there's the tacked on kind of like, like wrap up that was kind of put on, but it was really originally meant to end with the you're next, which would have been truly terrifying. But I just remember being very like taken by that movie. There's also just a great mood and atmosphere and tone, and that's usually what I look for in a lot of like things. Like I want like kind of a mood and tone. I mean, I always watch like the original Wolfman from 1941, which it's a very dated thing and stuck in the 1941 like it's from 1941. It's stuck in kind of the universal mode of making movies, so that the classic universal, but it still has such a great atmosphere and such great tone. And Lon Chaney Jr., who's never necessarily been the greatest actor, but he's great in that movie, and he's very he like plays this very cursed like character, and it's such a great thing. And another film like that is like, I saw it when I was probably in high school at like a revival theater in Minneapolis, was Them, which is like about giant atomic ants. Listen, totally preposterous like thing, and yet, you're just seeing giant ants. But I've shown it to friends now and watched it even recent years, and I'll watch it every year. It still has this great atmosphere and tone. There's actually great sound design because you don't actually see the ants for a while, but the sound is just fantastic of what you're hearing until you see them. I mean, going in, I want to see a giant ant, but like the build up to it is so great. And it really kind of all the kind of atomic like monster movies of like the 50s, I think that's the best of them. So if you're ever going to watch one, that's it, And
I'm sold. I want to see this.
Yeah. I mean, I do think like, I relate a lot of like horror, my initial horror movie stuff to seeing stuff in black and white. So I always feel like I have to like see a few things in black and white like around this time, because black and white really to me feels like October. It feels like fall. It feels like the changing of like of like the temperature. And I feel like a lot of these movies, I mean, I can remember like the smells of like fall when I was a kid still when I see them, you know. I mean, a lot of horror movies that I saw when I was a kid, I can remember seeing them, you know. And I think another one or two were like Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, which I think is the fucking, I would put it on par with the first one. I mean, it's not as good, but I love the movie so much. And also it was a movie that I saw as a kid on cable, I think, and I didn't know what the movie was for years. And there's a scene in it where, you know, there's these buttons, and there's a scene in it where this kind of tangential character is in a hotel room and she's messing around it, and it blows her lips off, you know, and it's a very gruesome image. For years that image haunted me. Like literally, like I had nightmares about it, and I didn't know what the movie was till about 5-6 years ago. And I watched the movie and I said, that's the image I've been thinking about for like 30 years now. And I couldn't remember what the movie was. And, you know, I've had a lot of movies like that I would just see, you know, on like kind of, it would be like the Sunday afternoon movie or like, cable, you know, thing. And I don't remember. And then I'll see them. I'm like, these images have been haunting me. And they typically tend to be more horror-driven things, but I think that's kind of an amazing thing, you know, that these images stick with you for so long, you know.
You were talking about black and white, and it just immediately I thought of Psycho, and like the shower scene and the blood in the drain. Oh, it still freaks me out. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's like another film I always watch. I mean, you know, I think it's been talked to death, so I want to spend too long. Yeah, but I still love watching that. I do remember like. Because I love Hitchcock in general, but I remember watching it with friends in college, like the first year in college. You're watching it in the middle of the day at the library. You could get like little rooms, you know, that like were closed off, so you could like watch things, you know. And I was watching with 3 or 4 friends, and one of I was watching with, I think there's a couple girls and a guy or two. And one of the girls started screaming bloody murder in a library, you know, like in the middle of the day when that scene came on, which I thought was amazing. That like, it's still like, you know, has the power to like freak people out. You know, it was like, I just love that visceral reaction you get. I mean, the last film I'll mention 2 more films. I mean, there's so many more, but you know, another one that I remember seeing when I was younger, which was just kind of a great experience. I remember seeing Christine, the John Carpenter film. And I remember it was like, we watched it on cable with like a friend of mine. I mean, I think the film's just super fun and kind of just great. But I do remember watching that too. And like, we would try to I convinced my dad to let us watch it. And he like read the little like listing. He's like, okay, cool. And he watched it with us, and the movie ended. And I think it was great. And then he's like, well, that was bullshit. I thought it was going to be about a kid fixing up his car and how great it was to get your first car. So it's like, I kind of always remember that when I watched that movie, like that experience. But I mean, I still think the film's great and super fun, but I still laugh every time I watch it because I just remember being so upset that he thought it was going to be, how great it was that a kid was getting his first car.
Like a wholesome movie about a car.
Totally. I don't know what he was thinking. He was showing like late night on a fucking Saturday, you know?
I'm interested in what the description actually said.
I think it was literally like, kid gets a car. I mean, it was, you know, you get these descriptions like on the thing, it would be one line, you know, it wouldn't really tell you too much.
Yeah, that's the fault of whoever wrote the description, partially.
Yeah, and the last film I mentioned, because like I said, I could go on for forever, is like Return of the Living Dead, which is the 1985 one, which I think is just an amazing film. I remember seeing it when I was young, and I've sort of, you know, I've watched it now. I watch it now all the time because it's just it has so much style and so much like fun to it. I mean, it really mixes humor really well with kind of these kind of very, what can be, like I said, I don't know, I don't mind scary, but I've watched it with people who are like freaked out because there is these things that are kind of, you know, freaky, but it mixes humor really well. I always love when horror does that, when it can mix like some stuff that's very horrifying and very gross, because the effects in it are still kind of amazing if you watch it, but it mixes its humor and the kind of the horrorness of it very, very well. I think it's still a really funny movie, and it also just has an amazing soundtrack and a lot of style, and it's just sort of like, I love good horror movies that can like have that great contrast, you know? between things, because I actually think it makes the horror more horrifying to me,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And I also think, you know, I like it when films have a sense of humor about themselves, you know, and know what they are
It should
and aren't
be
taking
fun,
themselves
yeah.
too seriously. Yeah.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that is about time now for us to reveal our topic
Yeah.
for next week. I think it's a good place to do it. And if you haven't figured it out yet, our topic is actually called Truly Terrifying. We've used that term a couple times.
Yeah.
And that was my pick this week. And really the idea behind Truly Terrifying as a topic is for the three of us to pick a movie that personally has just really terrified us, whether it was as a kid or as an adult, and talk about what it is that made it so scary for us.
This was a challenge because, you know, I don't think I'm scared of movies, and I don't really remember being scared of movies as a kid. I didn't really watch horror movies as a kid, but even the ones that I did, I'm like, oh, they're not scary anymore, though.
Right. Yeah. So this was a challenge for us.
Yeah.
I'll go first, right? Because it was my pick.
Go for it.
So as we've mentioned already, I picked Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Now, the version I picked is the 1978 version, but I actually debated which one to do because, of course, there's the original black and white from the 50s, which I'd never seen before. That had value to it. I do want to see it. And actually, the one that I saw as a kid that terrified me wasn't even the 78 version. It was just some random 90s remake that I watched.
That one's called Body Snatchers, right?
I think it's just called Body Snatchers, and I think that they're on a military base. But it was, I didn't know any better. I didn't know there were better versions, but it terrified me as a kid. And in fact, Justin, you were saying images that stuck with you as an adult. There's a shot in the 90s version. It was one of the moments where they just scream and point, but like that stuck with me so hard for years that I still remember it in my head.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about it on the episode, but that version really did a number on me as a kid. But in any case, I went with the 78 version because it's got Goldblum in it, and I love Goldblum.
Who doesn't?
And a young Goldblum.
A young Goldblum.
And Leonard Nimoy.
And Leonard Nimoy, yeah. It's got, and I mean, there's probably a lot of debate about which one's the best, but I think a lot of people view 78 as like the one they think of when they think of this movie now. So I went with that one. So that was my pick. Sammer, go ahead.
So I picked this Japanese movie that came out in 1999 called Audition, or Audition. How it's actually how is that the original title of it is Audition.
Okay.
It's directed by Takashi Miike. I think I'm pronouncing that right. And it is a freaky movie. So while I was looking for these movies, I asked a lot of people, Justin included, what's a scary movie? Like, what is your freaky movie? Like, what do you think is scary? And a friend of mine, Kat, told me about Audition. She said it'll freak you out. So about a half hour into the movie, I'm like, this isn't that scary. And then the last hour, I'm like, oh shit, this is insane. And I knew I had to pick it. And then just reading reviews and stuff about it, Tarantino calls it a masterpiece if there ever was one. I'm like, I'm in good company if I pick this.
It's a very touchstone moment too in horror. Like it really made a big splash when it came out.
Yeah,
I
for
can't
sure.
remember what year that was, but it really was kind of a game changer in horror. Very good. And then we don't have Chris here to give his movie, but we'll go ahead and just say what he picked.
You want me to do it or?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
He picked this movie called Martyrs. Came out. It's a French movie called Martyrs. It came out in 2008. The director and writer are Pascal Lejoie. I think that's how you pronounce it. I don't know why I got all the hard names today. But
yes. This is a movie that is not for the faint of heart.
No.
So
be very
warning.
wary about this movie. I was disturbed by it, but it is a very satisfying movie at the end, I will say.
Yes, and it really takes a couple of left turns. Like it starts off as one thing, and then it goes in very different directions. So, and I'd never seen it before. It's a crazy movie, yeah. But be warned, it is the most intense of the three. And I think Audition would follow that.
Yeah, I would
not far behind.
So.
Body Snatchers, by comparison, wasn't that intense.
No,
but
I do
it's a
think
classic and it's psychologically terrifying.
Yeah, I do think it's my favorite of the three, though. I just think the filmmaking was amazing in it, and I mean, watch all three.
Please do. And with that, I think that we should wrap up this episode.
Yeah.
We want to thank our guest, Justin Krohn. Thank you
It's a lot of
so
fun.
much
Thanks
for
a lot,
joining us
guys.
today.
Yeah.
This is a blast. And Sam, why don't you tell everybody where they can find us?
So you can find us on Twitter under A Few Good Movies P, and then YouTube under A Few Good Movies Pod, and Facebook under A Few Good Movies Pod, and Instagram under A Few Good Movies Pod. We try to post as much as we can. If you want to just email us and ask us questions or suggestions or whatever, you can email us at afewgoodmoviespod@gmail.com.
Awesome. And yeah, as always, reach out to us, give us suggestions for topics.
we love it.
Let us know how we're doing. Thank you again for listening. And Justin, thanks again for being here. We will see you next Monday for another episode of A Few Good Movies.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.